Well, hi, I'm Kate Hollenbach, and I'm a media artist and programmer. And this is an artist talk about a series of works that I made with software that I developed to record myself while I was using my phone. This is also my first in-person talk at a conference since 2020, and my first time at Strange Loop, so I'm really excited to be here. And thanks, that just really charged me up. This talk is called Art You Can Make by Spying on Yourself with Your Phone, and maybe should have been more accurately called Art That I Made by Spying on Myself with my phone, as I'll be more focused on showing you what the projects were rather than how they were made. So my work addresses the tensions of interface design, data collection, and new sensing technologies. And I'm enthralled by new technologies that expand the expressive capabilities of computers. I believe in the computer as an expressive tool and software as an expressive medium. But I'm also worried about some things. I'm worried about the growing amount of data that is collected and processed in the service of user experience and other intents. So to give you some context for this talk, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. Currently, I am an assistant professor in the Emergent Digital Practices program at University of Denver, where I teach art and creative coding classes, as well as technology and culture classes for both undergraduate and graduate students. So if there are any of you in the audience who think they want to spend 2 to 3 years in art school, I would love to talk to you afterward. And I'm also on the board of directors for the Processing Foundation, which supports the development of open source tools for creative coders like processing in P5.js. And for me, thanks. For me, working with code is an avenue for critically examining technology and making creative work. In a past life, I worked as a user interface designer and programmer as Oblong Industries Director of Design and Computation before I joined academia. And at Oblong, I worked with an interdisciplinary team of designers and programmers to build gestural interfaces and conference room collaboration products like Mezzanine, which is pictured in this slide. And after working in the software industry for a while, I started to wonder about what would happen if I were able to make some time to focus on personal work. And so I went back to graduate school at UCLA, where I studied Design Media Arts. And more recently, I've been making work about phones, gestures, and surveillance, which is what most of this talk will focus on. So some guiding questions for my practice are, what happens as computers know and learn more about human bodies? What freedoms and privacies are jeopardized or lost altogether? And how do human bodies change under the pressures of emerged virtual and physical reality? And as a disclaimer, I won't really answer these questions in the talk, but they're what I think about when I'm making work. So when I went to graduate school, it really resituated my expectations for how you use mobile devices and how and when it's appropriate to use a mobile device. So surely I had seen some and used mine in meetings at work and multitasked to do things like checking email during meetings or other secondary activities. But for some reason, I failed to expect that that would also be true in a university setting. And I couldn't believe that people were just checking Instagram during class. And this is because I hadn't been in school when the iPhone became widely adopted. So this change of context for me from going to industry and back to school kind of took mobile devices and made them conspicuous to me again and made them strange to me. So I really couldn't get them off my mind. And relatedly, Wendy Chun writes that habits are strange, contradictory things. They are human-made nature, or more broadly, culture becomes second nature. They are practices acquired through time that are seemingly forgotten as they move from the voluntary to the involuntary, the conscious to the automatic. And as they do so, they penetrate and define a person, a body, and a grouping of bodies. So I was interested in thinking about the habits formed around mobile phones, and I made a few works around this topic, including this work here, Infinite Scroll. And this is an installation that considers scrolling as a habit. In this project, I asked 9 friends to scroll through their Facebook and Twitter feeds and took a screen capture of each one of those. And then I wrote a really crude computer vision application in a platform called Cinder to convert the posts into blocks of color. So the installation plays each of the videos on a continuous loop, and the phones are mounted on the wall in a cluster above eye level, forcing the user to look up at them and admire them. So here it is in motion. And you can see the different speeds and habits of each user. So generally the motion is upward because that's the direction they're scrolling, but occasionally you see a pause or a downward motion where people are going back to see something that they maybe passed over a little quickly. And as an installation, I was also interested in what role the phone plays in documentation or the experience of the work and how it lives online. I'm also really interested in the language that's used to describe technology. So this is a piece I made around the same time that's a web-based project called Revolutionary Devices. And this project is still up at revolutionarydevices.com. It's a website that endlessly generates new mobile phone designs until the user closes the tab or the browser crashes the page because it's showing too many images. So some of the designs are strange, but most of them are pretty similar to today's devices. And so this is a play on the language that gets used to describe even mundane updates to technology projects. But the smartphone is something that I think probably most of us would no longer consider revolutionary. These days it's more of a commodity, and as a technology becomes a commodity, it becomes kind of unremarkable, which is when it can also become dangerous. So let's talk a little bit about the progression of user input devices for a computer and how they see, model, and abstract human bodies. So from the computer's perspective, the mouse reduces your entire body to a single Cartesian XY point in space with an on-off switch, maybe a couple if you have a fancier mouse, right? So ones or zeros for buttons. And newer devices like depth sensors can track more information about our bodies and how they move through a three-dimensional space, which gives lots of opportunities for new types of interfaces. And these types of devices also can help a computer understand things like when a person waves their hand. So depth sensors see a skeleton view of the body. It's much more detailed than the single point that the mouse describes the body as, but it's still a relatively simple model. So there are some key joints for the limbs, the torso, and the head, etc. Mobile devices add several other layers. They have multiple data layers. So some of these things are sensors like GPS that can say where you are, or motion sensors that know that the device is moving and probably you are too, or things like microphones so that you can actually call someone because it is still a phone at the end of the day. And importantly, there's also a high resolution camera on both the front and back of the device. So each of these types of sensors reveal more information about our bodies. And for me, the camera is of particular interest because it can be used to describe and analyze our facial expressions and head movements in the service of interface design. And this gives rise to a lot of new, really exciting and convenient features like being able to unlock your phone with your face. But I've also found myself really fascinated with the phone as a device that, for better or worse, sees a lot of its user and shapes the habits of its user. So the smartphone is usually a private display, but often visible in a public space like this one. And a one-to-one relationship between a person and the device exists. So usually there aren't multiple users for a phone like there might be for a desktop computer. And so even if you don't talk to your digital assistant like as a person, an emotional connection often still exists between a user and the device. And throughout the day, the user gazes at the phone. So does the phone gaze back? What if it did? What does it see? What does it understand? And what is at stake? So exploring these questions as an artist who works with technology, I wanted to develop some software to automate some video capture from my phone. So I was curious about what patterns or habits might become visible if I could see what my phone saw. So I started working on an Android app that I called phonelovesyoutoo that would automatically record video from the front and back cameras every time the device was unlocked. And initially, I thought I'd use this to make something like a feature film using footage from a single day. And while the footage from a single day didn't really seem that interesting on its own, I thought I might find something interesting if I kept recording for a while. And it was kind of hard to build the app, so I thought, I really want to see this through and see if anything can come out of this. So I recorded for a whole month, 31 days. And at the end of the month, I had about 1,100 video clips with anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes of footage per day. And this also meant that it was too much to watch and figure out what to do with it all, but I really wanted to see it all. So at school, I was lucky to have access to this amazing space, which had 5 projectors installed in an immersive environment. So I decided I would find out what the resolution was for that super projector and lay out all the clips to watch simultaneously, which results in the work that you see here. So the clips are arranged in the order that they were captured, left to right across the space. Some of them are really short, lasting only a few seconds, and some of them are up to an hour. Most of the videos are on the shorter side, just from activities like quickly checking social media or answering a text message. And the longer videos came from activities like reading an article, maybe from start to finish, which for me doesn't happen that often on my phone, but the longest activities by far were when I would have the GPS on my phone. And I lived in Los Angeles at the time, so sometimes if you have to cross town during rush hour, you might be using the GPS for like an entire hour, right? So this was the initial set of clips that I had. And here's a close-up from one section of the video. So it shows a lot of intimate moments that I wouldn't otherwise share with other people. And some of those activities include, I'm going to see if I can get my mouse over here. Great. So some of these activities include things like eating, down here in the bottom right-hand corner. In this one, my cat is trying to snuggle with me in the morning. In some of these, in the top left here, I'm actually in the car, and then perhaps walking from class or some errand and then going back to the car. And my favorite actual sequence in this project is what's in the bottom left-hand corner here, which is me getting my hair dyed. So I'm sitting under one of those like dryers, trying to wait for the bleach to set in. And so when I shared this with my classmates at grad school, one of them was kind of upset and said that the person in the videos didn't really look like me, because it didn't really capture any of my personality. It was really just me staring blankly at the phone, and it didn't have any of the normal, like, friendly affectations that I would have if you're talking to me directly. And I thought maybe that they also said this because they had never seen me without makeup on before, which accounted for most of the clips that were in this project, because a lot of them were from when I was at home. And also, if you're wondering, yes, did the app really change the way that I used my phone? It really did at this time. And I allowed this to happen. So it was really hard to tell what felt like it was authentic and what didn't. I did not try to perform for the camera, but there were some things where I would catch myself wondering, would I do this if I wasn't recording? Or do I not want to do this because I'm recording? And is that okay? And do I now am I thinking too hard about it? Should I stop doing it anyway? Or whatever. But I did use my phone a lot less during this time, which in some ways was really good for me. But in other ways, I had turned my phone into this awful kind of recording device. So that had its own things with it. And the other major change was that I rarely ever took my phone into the bathroom during this specific period of time. And here's the same project installed in another location at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. And so the work was up for about 3 months there, and I had an opportunity to watch people take their own posed selfies in front of the work. And sometimes they'd find me on Instagram and actually tag me in these selfies or mention me, which was really special. And while it seems like the project is really exposing, and it is, because all of these videos are playing back simultaneously, it's also really dizzying. And so it feels like it's also a place to hide. It's hard to focus on any one clip because it's something else in the corner always catches your eye. So it felt like, in some ways, this was like hiding in a crowded public space. And I wanted to see if I could change what the feeling of exposure was like by arranging the clips in a different way. So after I finished this iteration of the project, I immediately began thinking about how else I might compose the 31 days of video clips and how I might incorporate all of the footage from the back camera, which I had also recorded but not yet used. So the next work that I came up with looks something like this. In an effort to see more of the clips or to be able to focus on them better, I remixed the footage into a long-form video piece lasting 24 hours. And in the piece, both the front and back camera videos are displayed side by side and arranged in a calendar grid. So the clips are played at the time that they were recorded. So if you go to the gallery at 3:30 in the afternoon, you would see clips that were recorded at 3:30 in the afternoon, and only those clips. And if you wanted to see the ones that were from 10 a.m., well, you'd have to come back the next day at 10 a.m. So there's some problems with showing this work. And then the other detail is that when a clip ends, it leaves behind the last frame as a trace. So you still get to see some hint of what the other activity was. So at 7:30 in the morning, maybe there would be 3 clips playing, so these areas would be brighter and moving. Or at 6:45, there might even be more. And unlike the previous work, the results of this work feel very slow-paced. So instead of anxiety or an overwhelming feeling coming from the flurry of activity in the volume of the videos, it comes from wondering when the next clip might appear or when it might go live. And to heighten this, I added the sound of a phone unlocking when each clip would start and the lock sound when the clip would end so that people would think about their own devices too. So here are some stills from various times of day. This is around 9:15 in the morning. And this is around 10 in the morning. Not an uncommon time for me to be in the car, I guess. And 11:15, around noon. And around 8:30 at night. And generally in the evenings, there were less clips because I would be busy with other people around and not in my phone as much, whereas the morning hours tended to have a lot more activity. And here's one around midnight. So here's a clip of the video around 7:45 in the morning, which was apparently a very common time for me to wake up while I was in graduate school. And very quietly from my computer, I can hear the unlock sound playing. The cat is very cuddly. And as soon as she hears the alarm goes off, she wants me to know she's available. So looking at both of these works and reflecting on them, I felt that they both contained a sort of inherent judgment that maybe the phone is pulling us out of physical space and overwhelming our senses. And the reality is, our reality is more complex than that. Our lives are both simultaneously online and offline. So the videos I felt were a little misleading because they make it look like nothing's happening. But really, all the action at these times is on the device itself. So from here, I worked on a new version of the software that would also capture the screen to see if that would present a more complete picture of the activities that were taking place. And while working on previous versions of the project, I learned a lot about video encoding and was able to capture higher resolution video to work in this to use in this next iteration of the project. And this time I also had a visual style in mind for combining all 3 of the video feeds. So here's a different idea of what waking up in the morning is like. And there's a lot of sensitive information here. It feels really intimate to see the names of people in my inbox and Instagram feed while I'm in bed. Some of these people are close friends, but a lot of them are not. And then there's also some parts where I'm filling in personal information, like at this time I was, for health reasons, I was tracking my weight. And this iteration of the work is called User is Present. And it blends the front and back camera footage together with the screen capture using a really, really simple GLSL shader. So here's another version where I am actually talking to other people during this clip and looking at Instagram at the same time. And here's another one where I am waiting for the elevator at school and can't just wait without doing something. So good opportunity to check email or see what's going on Instagram. And while both of the previous projects I showed you had focused on me as a subject, I considered that more of a convenience than a goal for the project. It was easy to use myself as the subject. But after running some initial tests myself with the screen capture version of the software, it felt like time to expand the work and to get some other people involved. So I asked two very, very good and very trusting friends who were familiar with my practice and knew what they were getting into to participate. And so the result was an installation with 3 video portraits showed on a large display with the same proportions that a phone screen would have. And for this iteration of the project, like I said, I had also figured out how to capture the video a little bit more efficiently. So the encoding was better, and I was able to actually get a resolution that was good enough to look on the screen, or to look good on screen. And each video for each portrait was a different length, which meant that when people came back to see the installation at different times, or if they watched it for a while, they would see different juxtapositions of activities. So sometimes things would be very similar across all 3 portraits, or sometimes they would be really different. So here are some stills, looking a little bit different. As before, there are some awkward moments like eating or weird angles. And some sequences are resting at home, like this one on the left where I am doing the New York Times crossword puzzle as I lay on my couch. The one in the middle, I'm out grocery shopping and have my grocery list up. And in the third one, I'm doing some shopping for some intimate personal items while I text one of my friends to see what they're up to later. Other parts of this project might reveal personal details, like here are some articles that I was reading. Here's one that's a little meta where my friend is posting on Instagram about using the software. And another one where my roommate at the time is asking me about a recent date. So here are some of them in motion. And in these 3 clips, all 3 of us are using another device in the background, so that there's another computer being depicted. And accounting for data, I saw lots of different examples of biometrics being used, some things that were measurable, some things like one of my absolute favorite clips is the one in the middle here, where my friend is brushing her teeth and she kind of disappears for a while and then hears the phone make a sound and comes back to see what's going on. And in the third one here, Google Maps is up while my friend drives to another location. So here's what the installation looked like with all 3 videos together. And something that struck me working on this project was that it wasn't just the voluntary participants in this work who were implicated, it was also everyone that we knew from a distance. And this is the nature of our existence online. So it's not possible to opt out of every single transaction or interaction that we might have with someone, however large or small it may be. And the process for filming this piece was a little different than the one I had used for the others that I showed you today. So in crafting this piece, I was really careful to let my friends retain control of their data by letting them filter out anything that they didn't want me or the general public to have access to. So all of the recordings stayed on the devices until my friends transferred them back to me, so they had an opportunity to delete things that they didn't want me to have. And in one case, I also removed something from the video that a mutual friend had asked me to because they were doing some community organizing work and didn't want everyone to know that they were doing that at the time. So when they had seen the work up in the gallery, they were like, before the show opens, can you please remove that? And I did. And it's possible that some people would see this as a weakness of the work. But the goal here wasn't to just prototype a system of surveillance and accept all of the harm as a necessary part of the work. I still wanted to create the work with care and to tell stories about the impact of everyday technologies through a personal lens. So to wrap up this process, I interviewed my friends who used the app. And the results were mixed. One friend felt that it made them more wary of surveillance, and the other was really taken by the visual forms that the work generated and thought of it more as a new form of camera, especially because I had given her so much control over what would be shown in the gallery. So I also tried to use the opportunity to think about where their work might go next. And I asked some questions about sound, what this would have been like if I had also recorded sound, and the frequency of recording. So here are some of the things that they had to say. So this question was, what if the app had recorded all of the time, even when the phone was locked and not actively being used? And so this friend thought this would be like a little more scary, and also that they would have less control over what was being shown, because my experience using the app was that when I would pick up the phone, I had a moment to decide, like, ooh, do I really want to unlock this right now? Do I really want this moment to be a part of this artwork and record it forever? But if it's recording all the time, it sort of recedes back into the background of everyday use. And some things might be occurring where you leave the phone on the table and you're not sure exactly what it's doing at that time. And other friend thought that it really depended on where the data was ending up. So they were thinking about their direct experience using the app and how it had recorded only to their device and what that would be doing. For sound, my friends thought that this was really interesting because it would be harder to predict what the results would be, especially if it was recording all the time. And this is something I'm actually working on a project related to this idea right now. Last summer, I recorded 24 hours of audio through my phone and then processed the audio with some speech-to-text software. And I'm working on turning the transcript into a generative book. The audio transcripts are okay. Because this is a tech conference, I'll wrap up this talk with a very short description of my process, which I hope at least some of you will find relatable, though I'm not going to go in depth on it because I don't think it's particularly remarkable in terms of building an app. So there are actually two pieces to building these projects on the software side. So one is the Android app itself, which involved automatically capturing and saving the video from the phone's front camera, back camera, and screen whenever the device is unlocked. And the other piece was actually processing all the videos to turn them into a new project. So for the Android app, here's how I felt about my process for that at the time. This is from when I was finishing up this project. I wrote that I was getting a Master of Fine Arts in stitching together snippets of Android code from Stack Overflow. And so building the Android app was a process of trial and error. This is the first, and actually to date, still only Android app I had ever built. So I spent a lot of time looking at tutorials from the platform and reading help articles on which camera API to use and how to improve the quality of the recordings and how to make the recordings appear in the file server so that I could actually pull them off the phone, which I did not know for a while was a really important step. And as a part of this process, there was also an occasional assist from friends who knew the right search term. So it wasn't that they actually wrote some of the code for me. I would describe to them what I was trying to do and that I had tried to rephrase it as many ways as possible. And they would say, oh, Android calls that this. And then I would be like, oh, wow, there are so many articles on this. Thank you. And this is what the finished capture app looked like. It was nothing pretty, just 2 buttons designed mostly to be used by just me and never intended to be released in the App Store, just for personal use. So like I said, the second piece of custom software for this project was actually turning all the videos into the video that I wanted. And it turns out that there aren't really any programs available that will just simultaneously loop 1,100 videos for you, or at least I wasn't aware of any in 2016. So I tried to learn Touch Designer, thinking that that would be a really efficient tool to use, and also to learn more about Cinder, which is another creative coding platform built in C++, hoping that those would let me do things faster. But at the end of the day, I got stuck and fell back on some tools that I knew really well. So this ended up being a 3-step process. First was cutting all of the 1,100 videos for the first project into single frames for each one, so that I could read them frame by frame, do the layout for a single frame, output a new image that had all of them laid out together, and then stitch them back, all of those individual frames back together into a video. And so FFmpeg was the tool that I used for cutting all the videos into single frames. If there are any FFmpeg developers watching this talk, thank you. You make one of my favorite open source art tools. And the step for doing the layout, I actually use processing to read all the images from a directory, calculate how they should be composed and arranged, and then actually save the layout, the composed image into its own file. And then the last step was asking FFmpeg one more time to take all of those images that had been created in processing and to stitch them back together into a single video. And one final point of improvement for the third project was writing a Python script to automate all 3 of those steps so that they weren't manual, which is how they worked for the first 2 projects. So it was not a fast or efficient project, but fortunately I'm an artist, so that doesn't really matter. The thing that matters is that you show up with the gallery with the work, and it got the job done. So I just feel like every once in a while I need to make a plug for that too. And so while all of these projects utilize code and technology, I really want to underscore that the work is not really about building an app. The work is really about the impact of technology on our bodies and social relationships, and trying to understand that through a personal narrative. So throughout all of these projects, creating software was and continues to be, for me, a fundamental part of my process as an artist. It helps me understand the limits, possibilities, and risks of technological systems. All right, thank you so much for listening. Yeah, so the question was about how I had mentioned that using this app changed my habits using the phone, and then there was also a follow-up question, did I keep my house tidier or something like that as a part of this, knowing that it would show up in the video. And I think that to some degree, the answer is yes, and also mostly no for that one. I think for sometimes, like if I had laundry on the floor and it was like, I really don't want people seeing my dirty clothes, I might think for a second, what if I turned this way just a little bit while I answer this email? So I think yes, to some degree, but it wasn't a deterrent from like even looking at the device in quite the same way. Yeah, sure. So the question was, what was the choice, or what was the decision-making process like for deciding to use something that was very representational rather than abstract for most of the works? And I think that initially, the reason to use the video just as it was because I didn't know what I had, and I really just wanted to see what was there. For some of the later work, I didn't want it to be as directly representational, but still wanted to be able to see some of the work. And I do have another project that I didn't show today that does some more computer vision and like processing of the colors that are in the work as a print-based work. So it is something that's very much on my mind for future work. Yeah, so the question was, how much was I thinking about like spyware and malware, and who could access video from that as a part of this project? And I think that that was certainly on my mind, even though it wasn't something that was like directly visualized. Especially for some of the audio work that I've been doing after that, a lot of what I've been thinking about is when people kind of report like, oh, I was just talking to my friend about this and now I'm getting ads for it. So the like listening aspect was something that I was really interested in, kind of answering like the question for me, like, okay, well, what if someone did get access to my phone? Like, what would they be able to see?
I was making us super bored and
Yeah.
it was actually not rewarding.
Yeah, this is a really great question. So I'll repeat the question for the recording. The question was about if, for both me and my friends, if it was kind of a similar result having just the like blank phone face staring into the camera. And the answer is like for the most part, yes. With the exception of some moments where like it's clear that there's another person present who's being talked to directly. I am sure there are like a few clips where I kind of giggle at something as I'm like texting someone or something like that, but there weren't a lot of those. Like they're not in every single clip where a social interaction takes place. Mm-hmm. Sure, so the question is, does it make me feel more aware about like how I might look in public if I'm being recorded? And I think the honest answer is no, that I didn't really think about that a lot, but this question probably will change that for me. All right, thank you all so much for coming to my talk.